Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
I'm your co-host, Rich Gear, and Doug, we have a special guest with us, Dr. Jerry Bergman. Glad to have you here.
Good to be here.
See you, Jerry, again. And
we're actually in his home. We're actually in your home.
Yep.
So he's made us welcome, and we want to do a show. A couple of them if we get the time right. And you've written. How many books have you written, Jerry?
I'm on my 40th.
40 books.
And they're all so incredible. I've read many of them. Maybe not all of them. I think you write them faster than I can read them, but they're really, really good. And most of his books are they're dealing with the creation evolution subject in one form or another, most of them?
Yeah, most of them now. Before, I've done books on other areas, textbooks, college textbooks, and so on. But
right.
The books I'm doing now have been the past, 20 years, been on this particular issue.
Okay. Now, recently, Doug and I were out in New York, and we talked to Dr. Raymond Damadian.
It was yesterday,
actually. Yeah, it's very recent, okay. But it just so happens that Jerry here, Dr. Bergman here, is writing a book on the very issue of the MRI and the discovery and some of the things.
Yeah, I already wrote a book. Right here it is.
You wrote a book.
Right here it is.
What's the name of the book?
It's History and Evaluation of Non-Invasive Medical Diagnostic Treatment and Research Techniques. And that was actually a PhD thesis, which was done. My faculty advisor was John Short, who was a professor at University of Pittsburgh. And he worked with me on doing this. In fact, that's how I got interested in Damadian. And my first step in doing the thesis was a lot of reading. And one book I came across was this right here, Machine Called Indomitable. And that was the first book that introduced me to Raymond Damadian and the fact that he was a Christian, which I was rather surprised how important that was in his life and in his work. And so I read this book, and of course that led me into other areas. I became aware of him and aware of the technology, and then I became aware of the controversy that was created primarily because he accepted the creation worldview, which has nothing to do with medical field, which he wasn't a medical doctor. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, people brought that in, and his nemesis, Dr. Lauterbur, was a militant evolutionist, and that was part of the conflict that existed between them two in the history of this. As you may know, Lauterbur perfected the technique of analyzing the data. So Damadian came up with a technology to get the data, and Lauterbur came up with a technology to analyze the data because Damadian's technique would have never worked, it was too slow. And Lauterbur was able to get very rapid scans, although they've improved a lot since then, which allowed them to get very effective MRI pictures. So Lauterbur did the math basically and some of the technology, but the idea was originally begun, of course, by Raymond Damadian. In fact, in this book on American inventors, published by Time Life, subtitled The History of Genius, I bought this specifically because I wanted to know what they had to say about Damadian. And it was quite accurate. On page 76, said the work earned Lauterbur, along with English physicist Peter Mansfield, the 2003 Nobel Prize. There was controversy about this, as some scientists felt that Lauterbur and Mansfield technology advances would have been impossible without Damadian's earlier research. His original MRI machine is now in the collection of the Smithsonian. So they accurately brought out that basically they added to Damadian's work. And of course, as you know, Damadian was denied the Nobel Prize pretty clearly, and I did an article in here, Slaughter of the Dissonance book, pretty clearly showing that indeed his creation was the major reason why. Although obviously people are going to dispute that, but nonetheless I think that's the only logical reason you can come up, because the reasons that others came up I've managed to show pretty conclusively are not valid. So it's the only answer you have left. Of course, we don't know for sure because the proceedings are kept secret for 50 years.
Right.
So in 50 years from 2003 we'll find out exactly the details, although I talked to some of the members of the committee and they assured me that this was not an issue during the meetings. But now I talked to other people and they said, yeah, but it was an issue before the meetings. So they already knew that was an issue.
Well, you actually talked to some of the people that were on the committee.
Yep, and it's one person, and he, in writing, he said that was not an issue at the meetings. And so therefore I did some more inquiry work and concluded that indeed that was an issue. But
what we talked to Dr. Damadian about is that there was one fellow that he asked this point blank with, and he said, well, this was not an issue. But then he goes and dies.
Yeah, Doctor. What was his name? No, I can't think of his name. He mentioned it to it. Yeah, the guy that said this was not being an issue. He was kind of a friend of Dr. Damadian. He was on the committee, the Nobel Prize committee, and he ended up dying. And apparently, the guy that was going to be doing it, one of the people in charge of it, it's like they found out he was not going to be involved to support Damadian, and then it took.
So before the meeting, he had died. Oh,
Yeah.
I see.
Apparently, I didn't know that was true until we started talking. For the book, I thought he might still be alive. I wasn't sure if he was or not, but apparently he was not. And the idea was that Dr. Damadian himself had not talked to the guy directly for a few years, and so the guy thought he wouldn't be an issue. And then apparently, yeah, he had died. So it was. But the thing is, the guy, Dr.
Lauterbur, yeah.
Yeah. He later on says he's going to spend what's he going to do now. He's one that tries spend his career on molecular evolution or something, or
Trying to figure out how life could evolve from non-living molecules or
Right.
non-biomolecules.
So Harold Urey and Stanley Miller all over again, right?
Evidently, yeah, partially.
So anyway, Dr. Damadian, because in the book itself, his own book, The Gifted Mind, I think you might have a copy of that.
This one right here, yeah.
It's just an incredible book, and he was wondering there were other things, other factors that might have been. He thought originally, well, because he wasn't a scientist, he wasn't a PhD in physicist or whatever. But you look when you went back over and looked at the criteria for a Nobel Prize, it's medicine, physics, and chemistry.
Yeah, well, his was in physiology or medicine.
You're right.
And so certainly that would include medical doctors.
And the interesting thing about us is that in that particular field, you can have 3 recipients.
Right.
And the issue was the Lauterbur and the other, I can't think of Mansfield?
Peter Mansfield, yeah.
Lauterbur said if Damadian gets nominated, he will refuse his.
Yeah, that shows you the
That
antagonism
really
that
is
Lauterbur
ridiculous.
had.
That's too bad because when we talked to Dr. Damadian yesterday, he was very gracious about it. And in his book, he talks about what the contributions that Lauterbur did give. And it's really amazing that somebody could be that small-minded, but I think that's what that kind of teaching does. I think we've run across that a lot in evolutionary things. They are very small-minded in a lot of respects. They're very broad-minded as long as you agree with them.
Right.
Right, okay? As so many people are. As long as you're on their side, you're
okay.
You're broad-minded. Once you say no, I don't think that's right, suddenly you are anathema. You are like a pariah in the circles. You've run across that.
Yeah, we've seen that hate in the books I've written on this topic, which deal with the persecution and the discrimination against what I call Darwin skeptics. Indeed, some people are absolutely vicious, and I've often wondered why. And several people have said probably because if you're right, as one actually evolutionist told me, if you're right, I'm going to spend eternity in hell. So I would rather you be wrong. Therefore, you're very threatening to me because you basically interfere with the lifestyle I want to live.
This is what I think even from Thomas Huxley, who made the same statement as I remember. You would know the quote better than I would. It's not that creation is an unviable theory. I'm paraphrasing. It's just that we can't live the way we want to live.
Yeah, right.
I mean, Thomas Huxley said that way back in the day.
Yeah, that's basically they don't want their sexual freedom is the bottom line, and I think that's one of the things that keeps people away from their receiving God is that they think that God is going to mess with their sexuality and their sexual lifestyles, and they feel guilty about that, and so then either they deal with that or they end up reject God altogether.
Yeah.
But see, I asked the question, Doug, well, that may sound good when you're 20-something and you're hornier than a horned toad, basically. But what happens when you're 85 and it's all gone away? By that time, it's like it's like you come up, I don't know what the Bible calls a reprobate mind, or you're so entrenched in a certain way of thinking for so many years, you can't change. Remember when I've read things about Voltaire, when he was dying and he would see visions of hell swallowing out, flames coming, he was screaming out, and they would say, "Why just change?" He says, "I can't now."
Yeah,
and that's what really
change.
troubles me because of a short-term thing when you're in your 20s or even 30s or even 40s or 50s. But one time, if you live to be 80 or 90, you're not running around. I mean, that whole thing is kind of a moot point. But you've lived your whole life with this mindset, which to me, That's how deception is. You start out this way, and then you get to a point you can't change anymore.
Yeah.
And that's the real sad point.
So what else did you in your research find about Dr. Damadian?
One thing that I think is interesting, as you have many others have mentioned, is that you found him an extremely personable, nice guy.
Really?
And one of the reasons they gave for not giving him the prize, because they said he wasn't a nice guy. Now, I don't know what nice guy has to do with it. In fact, some of those who got Nobel Prizes were not at all nice guys. Not in the least were they nice guys.
Yeah.
So that I questioned that right away. But I've talked to a number of people now who knew him, and they said, no, he is just a very personable, one of the nicest persons they've known. I was up at U of M doing some work, University of Michigan, a while ago, and one of the persons involved in the magnetic resonance imaging program there told me, that's why he didn't get it, because he wasn't a nice guy. And I've heard that from others as well. I've heard that from, in fact, some of the reasons in writing they gave for not giving him the award. I don't like to call it a prize. It's really an award. It's earned.
Yeah, right, it is.
It's not really like you win a prize from in a contest. It's an award as a result of your achievement. But I just found no validity for that at all. And when I asked people why, they said, well, he walked out of a meeting once. And, well, maybe he had to go to the bathroom. Maybe he was tired. Or maybe he had a phone call. I mean, there are many reasons why someone walks out of a meeting, but that's rather, to me, they're really scraping the bottom of the barrel and trying to find a reason besides the real reason, which I concluded because of his rejection of Darwinism. But they're really scraping the bottom of the barrel when they try to find reasons not to award him the honor for what he rightfully did.
Well, he really ended up doing all the research. And they were going down a different rabbit trail to find the cause of cancer.
Yeah.
And he was telling about how they were looking for the sodium pump. That it was where you have a difference between the potassium ions and the sodium ions in the cell. And he was looking for this enzyme that would be doing this. And he finally came to the conclusion that there was no such thing. And he then started reading some other research, and they ended up using the special NMR machine to prove his theory and he ended up testing cancer cells from a mouse, and they were able to find out that this technology was able to identify this.
Yeah.
But
he started out with this little 2 1/4 inch diameter thing where he pushed it down into it, and he was able to read it magnetically, and that's where the dream of making a full size magnetic thing like that.
Right, nuclear magnetic resonance was done for chemical analysis.
Yes.
So he felt that why can't we analyze the chemicals in a mouse in this case? And that's about all room he had back then was that container, which was
had the
organs.
He had a tumor from the mouse. Yeah, he didn't even have it, just a little small.
Yeah.
And then he tried to do the experiment on an actual live mouse, and then he fried it.
He fried it the first time.
Oh.
Yeah, we were talking about the guys that actually went in there. Your first experiment, the mouse got fried. They were a little nervous when Dr. Damadian wrapped it around, and when they finally got one built big enough, and he got right around, didn't know what was going. Then he didn't get anything. And of course, you know the story. He's the doctor who was a big guy. What was his name? Dr. Goldman or what was his name? Anyway, the big guy, Goldsmith. I can't think of his name offhand, and he was a big guy. He's like 400 pounder, and he says to Dr. Damadian, "Well, you're too fat."
Yeah.
He was talking yesterday.
So that was the too fat hypothesis.
Yeah, too fat hypothesis. So they got little skinny Larry Minkoff at the time. He was a little skinny man. He's still pretty good shape now. I tell you, I don't know. I didn't ask him how old he was, but he's got to be. He's got grandkids and things like that. He's been with Dr. Damadian since the very beginning, and what a neat guy. And he went in there.
He walks in precisely at the time when we were having conversations
about him. Yeah,
about his experience getting into the machine for the very first MRI scan.
Of course, he says it slightly different. He says, "Well, no, I was afraid to be in the machine. Just I was doing some competing research at the same time. I want to help him out." It was really good. It's funny because they've been working together for a lot of years now. It's got to be over 30 years, 30, 40 years. Something
Well,
like
he
that.
was his PhD student.
Yeah, and they've been working together.
Larry
for a long
Minkoff
time.
was, yeah.
The other thing, back to what you were saying earlier, this is something that why Dr. Damadian believed that the creation thing is the big part of it. The Swedish government has now declared that everything is going to be from the evolutionary paradigm. Their science is going to be framed around that framework, the Darwinian evolutionary hypothesis. And Sweden is where the Nobel Prize. I mean, everything is framed around evolution in that culture. And I'm going, well, that gives it a little bit more credence. I'm kind of short-changing what exactly the words were, but it was like the whole culture and science in Sweden is evolution now.
Yeah.
Okay? The culture of evolution is epidemic, I call it, because to me it's like a cancer. Okay?
So I can see the political ramifications of that. If you give the Nobel Prize to a creation,
Oh my
they're
goodness.
really now validating something that is totally against your national philosophy, apparently.
What really gets you then is all the things that creation has been saying for the last 40 years, 50 years, whatever. The difference is not about science, it's about philosophy. It's
Yeah.
about faith. It's about religion.
Oh yeah, that's the central thing we're looking at. No one disputes what's been demonstrated scientifically. No one disputes that indeed we had a wolf similar to an animal similar to a wolf, and we got all these breeds of dogs. That's not of course the debate. The debate is where we came from. The debate is whether or not indeed from the goo to you by way of the zoo. That's the basic evolutionary teaching, and that's what the debate's about. Whether we came from goo by way of the zoo, or the animal kingdom. And so that's the focus. That's a pithy way of trying to explain what evolution's all about.
Of course, Doug and I are talking, and you, I know you get into it. To me, what really short circuits the whole thing, even before you get to the goo, how do you get to the goo?
Yeah.
How do you get to the
Well,
goo
that's
from
the biggest leap.
a rock, from a non-living thing to a living thing? In any sane way is absolutely, well, it's not even a theory like evolution is a theory. I know what they say. Oh, well, it's so clearly proven. Really? Then why is it still only a theory when the law of biogenesis is a law?
Yeah.
Okay? The law of gravity is a law. There's certainly the law of thermodynamics is a law. It's not theories. These are laws.
Well, right.
There's a difference, okay?
Yeah.
And I don't care how you try to frame evolution, it's still a theory, and it's got lots of flaws, and there's a reason why it's only a theory, and I believe a bad one at that. So anyway, that's the law of biogenesis. Life always comes from life.
Right.
How many of your books do you have that talk about Dr. Damadian's story?
Well, my one book here, which Slavic Dissidence, has a whole chapter. And then part of a chapter in my next book, which is Silencing the Darwin Skeptics, is volume 2, and volume 3 should be out any day, which is Censoring the Darwin Skeptics. And that I do have some information in there about Damadian as well. So it's in 2 books. Oh, plus Persuaded by the Evidence, we have a chapter which he wrote.
Yeah, we got his
And that
testimony in that.
covers that. So actually he's in 3 of
And
3 of the
Persuaded by
books.
the Evidence is going into a second printing, which I find
Very gratifying.
Gratifying, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it sold 5,000 copies, which is good. And about 98% of all books sell less than 1,000 copies.
Mhm.
So we're above the 98%. We're quite a bit above the 98%. Vast majority of books, by the way, sell less than 100 copies.
Is that right? I didn't
Yeah,
know
the
that.
less, and I've got the data, which I can show you, but yeah, the vast majority sell less than 100 copies.
And my first book, Revolution Against Evolution, had the first printing was 2,500 copies, and the second one was 5,000. And I think I've got 8 copies left.
Not
Okay.
So,
bad, buddy.
and that really wasn't all that spectacular of a book. I mean,
I can read some of yours, Jerry. Yours are incredible. The footnotes alone would keep me occupied for 3 days, and I mean they're just copiously footnoted. When I look at the Slaughter of the Dissident, when I read that one, and then that one you had on the with Hitler on the cover. What was the name of that one? The one with Hitler on the cover. The Darwin? No, that's not the Darwin effect. That's,
Hitler and the Darwinian worldview.
yeah,
or something
and then
like
the
that.
Darwin.
Right.
And I look at that footnote, I go, wow, But folks out there, you can't believe we've been to Jerry's library, and it is amazing. This is a library that's bigger than most people's houses. What's your most? I know we're a little far afield there, but what's your most treasured or rare or most interesting book that you probably have in your library? Can you think about that?
Well, I have a book done by Sadis, who was the son of a Harvard professor, and he himself earned his PhD when he was like 9 or 10. And he knew like 15 languages, and he wrote several books, but he ended up getting burned out, I guess the best expression, and he died leaving primarily a collection of transfer tickets to his legacy, and he ended up accomplishing very little. He worked at menial jobs for much of his life, but he did write a number of books, which I managed to find one. Not many are around. In fact, I did find one on the internet, and they wanted something like $900 for it. So,
wow. When did he live?
He, well, died, I think, in the 30s, 40s, around there.
Wow.
And so...
what do you write about?
He had, that's very esoteric topics. That's why he didn't sell many copies, because it's very hard to follow. But a lot of mathematics stuff he was oriented toward, and a lot of related. But he...
So you've met Dr. Damadian, I presume, and talked with him, and
talked on the phone mostly, and corresponded a lot. When I did the chapter on him, I sent it to him to make sure that it was accurate and up to snuff, which I do with all the stuff I write. I try to send it out to people who are knowledgeable, so I can get some feedback. Sure. And so that's an important part of writing. It's said that books are never written by one person.
Right.
They're always written by a team of people, although the others may not get the credit they deserve, but nonetheless, stuff I've done has been extensively gone over by a number of people, and that way you make sure it flows right, it's accurate, invariably people catch things I missed. I might have the right spelling, but it's the wrong word. And it's similar to another word which I'm looking for, like break and break. There are brakes in a car, and then to break a jar.
Yeah.
And so I've occasionally in the past, not a lot of those mistakes, but occasionally I've got that one mixed up. So I got to get the right break.
Well, I've always said that an editor is somebody that you hire to tell you that your baby is ugly.
Yeah, well, fortunately they didn't say that, but they said there's a few flaws on your baby we need to fix.
That's right, yes. Yeah. An auditor is the same way, but it's interesting that one of the things that came up right at the end of our fellowship with Dr. Damadian this time was his new research, which is really something that I think is going to help a lot of people, and he's finding out that a lot of his MRI machines are now being used in the analysis of the spine. And what I think he's demonstrated is that the lesions in the brain are being caused by the backup of cerebral spinal fluid that flows down the spine, back up, and there's a regular flow that goes on. And if there's a impingement in the cervical area, it will impede that flow to the point where lesions start to form in the brain, and he believes that this is a cause of things like Alzheimer's, MS, and Parkinson's. So I'm we're going to talk about taking my sister out there because after her brain injury, to see if there's something that we can do for her, because he's actually been treating some people with actually a chiropractic maneuver. I guess is a new. I think chiropractic has got maybe been barking up the wrong tree in a couple of areas, because I don't think they focus on the cerebral spinal fluid as much as pinched nerves. But
in fact, they have the books over there if you want to grab that for a second.
All right.
And this is one thing, and it's cranial cervical syndrome and MRI. And the MRI can actually see things that the X-ray and CAT scans have never been able to see. And that's where these lesions, the fluids leaking out into the brain or being stopped and impinged. And he talked about, there's an actual special machine. What's it called? Let's see if I have it in here. There it is. It's called the Atlas Orthogonal Instrument. We're not trying to promote anything. I'm not going to make any money off this. It's just that it's the very top vertebrae very easily can knock out, and if it causes a bottleneck there, it could cause problems. He thinks, and he may be onto something very significant. What's interesting is the MRI allows all this to be seen.
Yeah.
You could never see anything before this. The invention that he did with magnetic resonance, and then that was the thing about MRI. It was NMI or NMR originally, nuclear magnetic resonance. They wanted to get rid of the nuclear word because people are going to get nuclear radiation.
Yeah.
And then they wanted to put the word imaging in it, so NMR became MRI. And that's where that comes from. So it's the same thing.
Right.
All right. And
the way it works is there's a magnetic signal that pings the atom, and then the atom responds with its own radio frequency, and so it's that radio frequency that comes back that is measured by the MRI. And the differences between the different kinds of atoms, and I guess that's actually the water surrounding those atoms.
Hydrogen, responds to hydrogen.
And so that and the quantities of that in the cell in the various forms of tissue determines if it's diseased or not. Like cancerous cells, there will be a lot of cells that will have broken down and have lysed, where they've broken apart, and that releases lots of water. And so there's the MRI is a breakthrough type of technology that has saved millions of lives, and I think this is something that we need to give Dr. Damadian credit for.
Yeah. The other thing that's interesting is when we talk about the scanning of cancers, what they're doing right now, I guess we're getting pretty close to the end here, but it was interesting. He was talking about the technique where you could do a main scan for somebody who's got cancerous, but once you've done that initial scan, which could be expensive. Insurance may not, $600 or whatever it is. You can, once you know where the tumor is, you can go in there in about 5 minutes or 8 minutes. You scan. It's like you can find that the tumor, if the medicines is actually treating it properly and shrinking the cancer down. He showed us a scan where you see the cancers going down from week to week. They were doing a scan every week to show that. These are some revolutionary things, Jerry.
And instead of $600 a second and third scans, or
$60.
Yeah.
I learned to appreciate MRI mostly when I took a course in medical school in MRI, a whole semester. We studied MRI, and the professor brought us to the medical school's MRI, and basically they put one of the fellow students, in the MRI machine, and we scanned from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. And we were in there for about 2 hours. And the detail was enormous. It was almost like doing a dissection, except it was black and white. It wasn't a color, of course, but I learned to really appreciate the enormous detail that you can pick up from the scans. And this is, we didn't get photographs, we got right on the screen, so the detail was not lost.
Yeah,
so
and soft tissue. The ability to see soft tissue was never like this. And
Yeah.
I didn't realize, too, when he was talking about how the difference ratio of decays between the different kinds of organs, they're mapping that out, and so you can tell which one's cancerous or not. So many things. It's really, really good.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I'm being told to wrap it up, so I guess we better do that. Huh?
We'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution.